Mic testing. Mic testing. Mic testing. Okay, let's open this time with a word of prayer, offering this time to God. Oh God, we thank you that you truly love us and for helping us this day. Work in us and also help us in our discussion that we would understand about communicative language teaching. Take care also of our loved ones and our schoolmates in PNU Mindanao. Please help them recover. Take care of people who are serving you, Lord, and serving others. Continue your provision for us. Give us good connection and good technicals. Continue to provide for us and protect us. May we always walk in your light and be a blessing to others, especially those affected by calamities. Thank you so much, O Lord. Always, all these we pray in Christ's name. Amen. So, class, last time we discussed audiolingualism, which was based on behaviorism, and the idea of audiolingualism is to instill new habits. So, it's all about instilling new habits. So, the teaching approach has relations to habits and how they are developed in an individual. Now, as we said, one big problem with audiolingualism is the tendency to manipulate form without meaning. So there is very little effort to use language communicatively. The language that's used is not meaningful, it's not realistic. And people had found out that just like in riding a bicycle, where you need to actually ride a bicycle in order to learn how to ride a bicycle, that's the same thing with language. If you want to learn language, you need to actually use language. That's why communicative language teaching was born, and that's what we'll discuss today. Communicative language teaching. It's a teaching paradigm that emphasizes the use of language to communicate. So language is used for communication, for actual communication. And proponents of these include Noam Chomsky, Stephen Krashen, and Larry Selinker. Communicative language teaching was based initially on innativism, then on communicative competence. What's that? Communicative competence. Well, communicative competence, simply put, is being able to say the right things the right way at the right time. Saying the right things the right way at the right time. That's communicative competence. Communicative competence is Professor Delheim's reaction to Chomsky's emphasis on grammar alone. You see, Noam Chomsky believed that when a language learner acquires grammar, the language learner acquires the language. And Delheim said, no, there are actually so many things that uh, a language learner, needs to learn, not just the grammar. They need to learn to be able to say the right things at the right time in the right way. For example, how will you properly, naturally say in English, pang ilang presidente si Trump? I have the video on that. I'll share that with you later. Or how do you say, pakibariyahan mo nga ito in a natural way? Now, we can always think of ways in English to say these things, but not native speakers might not actually understand us. So we need to understand to to how to say them idiomatically. Pang ilang presidente si Trump, pakibarihan mo nga ito. So these are examples of uh, the utterances that show communicative competence. So communicative competence involves four things. It involves linguistic competence, social linguistic competence, discourse competence, strategic competence. When we say linguistic competence, this is being able to use the structural aspects of language, including pronunciation, grammar, and vocabulary. You know how to pronounce, you know the grammar, you know the vocabulary. You're able to pronounce, you're able to utter grammatical sentences, and you know how to use which words for what. You know the right words to use. That's linguistic competence. Then we have social linguistic competence. Social linguistic competence is being able to use language in a communicative situation based on societal norms and practices. So you are able to talk according to the culture. So for example, in Tagalog, you know when to use po and opo. You know when to use uh, the right words for talking with older people. You don't say to older people, sino ka? You say, sino po sila? So you put po and you use the third person instead of saying sino ka. In Japan, maybe I've heard that when you talk, you should avoid gesturing. Social linguistic competence also involves knowing what tone of voice you need to use, how to use the tone of voice, or even your verbal and non-verbal aspects of your utterances. This is all dictated by the culture and the society. So that's social linguistic competence, being able to use language in a communicative situation based on societal norms and practices. Then you have discourse competence. This is being able to string together utterances to produce a coherent message. So there's a typo there. I don't want to correct it right now. Number one, being able to string together utterances to produce a coherent message. Okay, number two, knowing how to link words, phrases, and clauses, including sentences, in order to produce a coherent message. That also involves organizing ideas logically. That's for speaking. For listening, it involves understanding the structure of different types of communication like narratives, descriptions, persuasion, or explanation, as well as common text types like reports, invitations, requests, etc. So you are familiar with the different deliveries of utterances and language. That's discourse competence. And then there's another one. It's called strategic competence. This is being able to properly manage a conversation. That includes starting a conversation, fixing any breakdown in communication, turn taking, redirecting, you changing the topic. How do you change the topic in Tagalog, for example? You say, maiba tayo, maiba tayo, o maiba ako. And then how do you conclude a discussion? And all other conversation skills relating to managing a conversation. This is called strategic competence. So again, communicative competence is being able to say the right things the right way at the right time. And communicative competence involves linguistic competence, social linguistic competence, discourse competence, and strategic competence. And it is upon this idea that communicative language teaching is based. Okay? Now, communicative language teaching tries to produce learning by creating situations that produce the following situations. Okay? So you try to produce the following situations as a teacher. First, interaction between the learner and users of the language. Interaction between the learner and users of the language. So according to the Interactionist School of Language Learning, it's actually the interaction between the brain and the environment that drives language learning. Also, according to social learning theory by Lev Vygotsky, learning is best when it's done in the context of other people, particularly other people who are more knowledgeable than you. So, interaction between the learner and users of the language. Users of the language may not necessarily be native speakers. Okay, what is important is that they are able to use the language properly. And you interact with them, so you imbibe with learning from them. And then CLT also tries to produce learning by creating situations that produce the following situations. Collaborative creation of meaning. You are both able to derive meaning from the conversation. The conversation is meaningful to all participants. The conversation is all meaningful to you. Okay, unlike in audiolingualism, where you have a skit and you discuss the meaning, you discuss the sa mo ko club na rin. Bili muna ng konti. Mga 3 pieces. Sorry about that, class. Ng salbutamol, yes, 1 bottle. Okay? CLT tries to produce learning by creating situations that produce the following situations. Collaborative creation of meaning. You are all able to derive meaning from the actual conversation. There's actual meaning It's actually meaningful for you. Unlike in audiolingualism, where you have a scripted dialogue, that's not really meaningful to you. So the script can involve anything in audiolingualism, but it's not meaningful because it's not realistic. But in CLT, the idea is the interaction, the conversation should be meaningful for all people, all participants. All participants cooperating with each other, collaborating with each other, producing meaning for all participants. It also involves creating situations like creating meaningful and purposeful interaction through language. So there's interaction, you have your purposes for the conversation, and you are able to achieve the purpose, your purpose for the interaction. You're able to derive meaning and purpose in the conversation. It's not an empty conversation like in audiolingualism. It's actually purposeful, it's actually meaningful, and there's actual interaction. There's genuine interaction through language. Okay? The goal is not to acquire the form, but to actually be able to use language to produce useful relationships. So it's not really the form that you are aiming at. Rather, you aim at meaningful, useful relationships. Using language to produce useful, meaningful relationships. By the way, class, according to Michael Holiday, there's such a thing called fatigue communion. The idea is when you talk to people, you actually build a relationship with them, no matter how shallow. As long as you talk to people, you create a relationship with them. So in CLT, the goal is not to acquire the form, but to actually be able to use language to produce useful relationships. That's why you can even use the first language as a bridge. This is especially true, class, if the people you are talking with are also familiar with your first language. So for example, you're talking with your teacher in English. Your teacher also knows Tagalog. And so you're able to use Tagalog words and your teacher is able to try to translate them in English. Okay? Communicative language teaching also tries to produce learning by creating situations that produce the following situations: negotiation of meaning as the learner and the interlocutor arrive at an understanding. So sometimes you don't clearly understand each other. So what you do is called negotiation of meaning. There's clarification going on. There's clarification. Negotiation of meaning involves strategies and actions that are aimed at expressing and understanding or receiving meaning. So there's clarification. There are strategies used in order to produce meaning, to be able to express your meaning, and to be able to receive, derive the meaning from other people. So that's negotiation of meaning. Remember, class, according to interactionists, negotiation of meaning is what really produces comprehensible input. Again, according to interactionists, negotiation of meaning is what really produces comprehensible input. Negotiation of meaning is what makes the input comprehensible. Okay? Now, negotiation of meaning involves number one, strategies to express one's ideas and purposes clearly. So, you have strategies to express your idea and purposes, and strategies to help the hearer understand what one is trying to express. You try to express your ideas and you help the hearer understand what you're trying to say. So, class, for example, when I still didn't know how to say pang ilang presidente si Trump in English, I would try to use strategies to express ideas to a native speaker, to an American I was talking to. For example, once upon a time, I spoke with an American. I wanted to know pang ilang presidente si Barack Obama. And so I said, this is how I said it. Um, George George Washington was the first president of the United States. How about Barack Obama? Okay, so that's strategy as a strategy to express one's idea, my idea and purposes. My purpose is knowing pang ilang presidente si Barack Obama. And it also involves strategies to help my listener understand what I'm trying to say. Because I didn't know how to say it in English. Pang ilang presidente si Barack Obama. So I made use of strategies to be able to express my meaning, to be able to achieve my purpose, and to be able to help my American listener understand what I'm trying to express. That's what we call negotiation of meaning. So, negotiation of meaning involves strategies to express one's ideas and purposes. Negotiation of meaning also involves strategies to help the hearer understand what one is trying to say. Next, CLT tries to produce learning, natututo yung mga tao, yung mga language learner. CLT tries to get language learners to learn by producing the following situations. Learning through attending to the feedback that learners get when they use the language. So if you say something and the feedback is okay, then you realize, oh, you're saying it right. But if you say something and the feedback, the reaction is not ideal, then you realize, oh, there's something wrong. So, class, this is the part where I talk about a woman, a lady friend that I spoke with. So, when I was still studying in UP Los Baños, we had an organization, and our Christian organization, had visitors from Australia. They were women. They were actually Chinese Australian. And as part of the visit, they were set to live in a house, to stay in a house. The problem was the house was a little bit far from the school center, from the school center. So there was a security issue. So as part of the security, I was supposed to stay or sleep in the house at night where they were sleeping in. They would sleep uh, upstairs. I would sleep downstairs. So when I met one of the visitors, the women visitors, I made the mistake of telling her, um, I'm going to sleep with you tonight. I'm going to sleep with you tonight. And you can imagine the reaction of the woman that I was talking to. She was embarrassed when I told her I'm going to sleep with you. So needless to say, I learned that that's not the right way to say things. I was acutely aware of that, but at that time I didn't realize that it was wrong. I was acutely aware that sleeping with somebody means having sex with that person. But at that time, I forgot the meaning. So I told her, I'm going to sleep with you tonight. When I actually meant I was going to sleep in the house, in the same house where they would sleep in. They would sleep upstairs, I would sleep downstairs. But I made a mistake of saying, I'm going to sleep with you tonight. So the feedback that I got was really quite embarrassing for the two of us. And so I realized, oh, I should really not use that term. I should remember never to use that term. Oh, another case was when I was with my Canadian friend and I was wearing jeans and I sat on cement where there was soil. And I told my Canadian friend, "Oh, I soiled my pants because I sat on a cement piece of on a slab of cement with soil in it. So my the soil stuck to my pants." And I told my Canadian friend, "I soiled my pants." And then he laughed at me because soiling one's pants means defecating on your pants. Okay. Okay. So I realized, oh, I shouldn't say soiling my pants because soiling my pants is like defecating on my pants. So those are the feedback that made me realize, oh, I shouldn't use these terms. Okay. Now CLT tries to produce learning by producing learning through attending to the feedback that learners get when they use the language. Okay. CLT also tries to produce learning by creating situations that produce the following situations. Here's another one. Paying attention to the language one hears, that is the input, and trying to incorporate new forms into one's developing communicative competence. So if you look at the illustration, a child said, American said, I'm not familiar with cricket. And the dad said, neither am I. And the Filipino participant used the same term, the same phrase, neither am I. So maybe the Filipino child was not aware of that particular phrase, neither am I. But because he heard it and was able to he was able to guess the meaning, so he also was able to use it properly. So the child said, I'm not familiar with cricket. The dad said, neither am I. Something new to the Filipino child, but he was able to use the same phrase, neither am I. So the idea is paying attention to what you're listening to and trying to incorporate those new forms into one's developing communicative competence. So neither am I is an example of that new form that the child was able to use as part of his developing communicative competence. So you listen and you are able to use chunks of speech that become meaningful to you. Okay? Now, paying attention to the language one hears requires that the input is comprehensible. In the case of the Filipino child, the input was comprehensible for him. He was able to deduce the meaning of the word of the phrase. It was comprehensible for him, and the input should also be in the right amount so that the learner can process it. So neither am I in that case was in the right amount. It was not too much. And so the learner was able to process it. So the input is comprehensible, the input is in the right amount, and the learner should be in a good emotional state to do so. Because if the learner is bothered by something, they will not be able to their uh, spend their time focusing on language learning. So a good emotional state is required in order for a language learner to process the input. First, the input should be comprehensible, understandable. Second, there should be enough, just the right amount, so that the learner can process it. And then finally, the learner should be in a good emotional state to do so. he or she should not be bothered. Class, what is this part here? The learner should be in a good emotional state to do so. That is the affective filter hypothesis. That the learner should be in a good emotional state to do so relates to Stephen Krashen's affective filter hypothesis. If the affective filter is up, meaning the language learner is bothered, he or she will not be able to process the input because he or she is bothered. What is needed is that the emotional filter, the affective filter, should be done down, meaning the learner is in a good emotional state. So again, being able to get chunks of speech from other people and use them meaningfully involves that the input be comprehensible, the input should be in the right amount, and the learner should be in a good emotional state to do so. Also, CLT tries to produce learning by creating something like this. Trying out and experimenting with different ways of saying things. How would you say this? How would you say that? You try to experiment. Now, that experimentation is called hypothesis testing. When you experiment with utterances, when you experiment with your utterances, this is called hypothesis testing. The learner tries to create sentences or utterances and, based on the feedback from others, makes the necessary adjustment to one's own speech. So you try to say something, and based on the feedback from others, you adjust your speech. Maybe you realize, oh, your grammar, your utterance is quite good already, or maybe you realize there's something wrong with your utterance in a way that produces doesn't produce the right expression, or it doesn't produce the right purpose. It's not consistent with your purpose. That's hypothesis testing. Okay, trying out and experimenting with different ways of saying things is hypothesis testing. You try to say something and you listen to the feedback of others, and based on the feedback, you adjust your speech. Here are some principles of communicative language teaching. The first is structure or grammar is acquired by understanding and expressing content or meaning instead of practicing structure. In audiolingualism, based on behaviorism, it's structure that's practiced. But in CLT, communicative language teaching, grammar is acquired by expressing meaning, by understanding and expressing meaning. So it's counterintuitive. Okay, you acquire the structure not by focusing on the structure, but by actually trying to use the structures for meaningful communication. Also, one important characteristic of communicative language teaching is speech must be comprehensible. Needless to say, this is based on Krashen's comprehensible input hypothesis. Now, how do we make input comprehensible? You provide extra linguistic information. You provide extra linguistic cues. You provide extra linguistic cues. Okay, so speech must be comprehensible in order for it to be properly processed. Now, another principle is a learner benefits from I plus one input. I plus one means the set of skills that are just a little beyond your present set of skills. Also, even though I plus one is the most useful input, a teacher must not try to use I plus one because it might not jive or match what I plus one your students actually need. Also, if you focus on I plus one, it benefits only one student, the one with the exact I plus one. So a teacher must would actually produce or provide approximately I plus 1. Not I plus 1, but approximately I plus 1 is what a teacher should provide. So a learner benefits from I plus 1 input, a set of skills, the set of skills just beyond one set of skills. But in the classroom, a teacher must not try to use I plus 1, rather must use approximately I plus 1. And another principle in CLT is that the first language may be used to help communication. The first language is used to bridge communication gaps. This is particularly useful if the second language speaker that you're talking with is also familiar with your first language. So when that happens, the use of the first language is very, very useful. Okay? So the first language may be used to help communication by bridging communication gaps, which is particularly useful when the second language speaker that you're talking to is also familiar with your first language. Another principle in communicative language teaching is that errors should be used to gain insight into what the learner is doing. It's not something you immediately try to get rid of. Rather, you use errors for you to understand what is the learner doing. For example, when a learner, maybe a child or an adult language learner would say foots, go, tooths, bringed. So you realize that the language learner is actually applying rules. The only problem is that the language learner applied the rules in exceptions, in situations where they're not supposed to apply that rule. So the error is not something you try to get rid of, rather you use it to gain insight into what the learner is doing. Okay, also, another principle of CLT is that there is a difference between language learning or explicit memorization, learning of grammar rules, and language acquisition. There's a difference between language learning and language acquisition. Class, you probably realize that this came from Stephen Krashen's first hypothesis, the acquisition versus learning distinction. There's a difference between language learning, which is explicit, and language acquisition, which is subconscious. Okay. Another principle is that grammar rules should not be taught, rather, grammar rules should be acquired inductively. So, unlike PPP, where you present the grammar rule, you provide examples, and you get your students to produce them. Present, practice, produce. No, in, instead, you provide examples, and the students try to acquire the rule inductively. I think, class, this is one of the few things that are similar between audiolingualism and CLT. That grammar rules should be acquired inductively. That's the only, I think this is one of the few things that is shared between audiolingualism and CLT. That grammar should be learned or acquired inductively. Give examples, and it's the learners who try to formulate the rules. And in CLT class, the role of a teacher is more on facilitation and discussion of tasks. The role of a teacher is more on facilitation and discussion of tasks. Class, the role of a teacher in audiolingualism is to be the model, the role model. You produce the right pronunciation, you model the right grammar, you model the right vocabulary. So you're the model that the students will imitate, because audiolingualism involves imitation. You as the teacher serve as the model who will be imitated by your students. But in CLT, the role of a teacher is more of facilitator and discussion of tasks. Because the tasks produce interaction. The task involves all the situations we were talking about a while ago. Remember all the situations that CLT wants to produce? They can be produced using language tasks, tasks that involve the use of language. Okay? Communicative language teaching makes use of communicative events. Communicative events, events, situations where you use language to communicate. Maybe introducing yourself, maybe expressing your opinion, maybe inviting somebody, maybe apologizing, maybe giving advice. So for a while, class, for a while. Yes. Hanap ka na lang sa ibang tindahan ng bronchier. Dun sa Walter, dun sa, yung malapit sa klinika sa Lawag. Yung Watson sa malapit sa klinika sa Lawag. Wala, dyan ako bumili eh. Kasi kaya nga ako pinapunta kita ng metro ng Mercury Drug kasi wala na doon. Or wait. Saan ba ako bumili ng ano? Oo, doon ako bumili. So wala na sa district. So sa Watsons na malapit sa klinika sa Lawag. Baka i-try mo doon. O, bili ka na ng Coamoxy Club. Bumili ka na. O, bumili ka na. Baka wala naman doon sa kabila. Kung ano yung meron, bilhin mo na. Okay, thank you, Mommy. God bless you. Love you. Sorry about that, class. So sorry about that, class. Uh, just need to get medicine. Okay. So one principle of CLT is to make use of communicative events because it's the communicative events that are meaningful. Okay, you don't now audiolingualism might mimic communicative events, but they're not really communicative events because they are not genuine, they're not realistic, they're just make believe. But in CLT, the idea is that it's real, it's not something imagined. Okay, it's an actual event that you are able to use to make use of. Okay, and we talked about principles. Let's now talk about some practices of CLT, practices involved in CLT. CLT makes a lot of use of task-based activities because when you do tasks, you are able to use language in order to accomplish those tasks. So when you have a task, when you accomplish a task, you are actually using language for meaningful purposes. You are able to use language meaningfully. You are able to use language for your purposes. You're able to collaborate collaboratively create meaning, you involve negotiation of meaning, there's hypothesis testing, there's feedback, there's interaction. So it makes use, sorry about that, makes a lot of use of task-based activities. The tasks produce collaborative creation of meaning. The task produces genuine situations where you really need to use language communicatively. Okay. Another practice of CLT is interaction with much more knowledgeable individuals. So again, you go back to Lev Vygotsky here, and you remember my illustration about my mom, who was also an English teacher in PNU, and she and her colleagues learned English through textbooks which did not contain the English word for aray. And no matter how they practiced, they could not learn the English word for aray. You need a much more knowledgeable individual to help you with it. Similarly, in my quest to know how to say in English, uh, pang ilang presidente, si Barack Obama, I would not have known how to say it properly in English except that somebody more knowledgeable than me was able to teach me. That's why interaction with much more knowledgeable individuals is important, because interaction with much more knowledgeable individuals produce the hypothesis testing. You're able to use hypothesis testing because they're more knowledgeable than you, and you are able to negotiate meaning, and you're able to get chunks of speech from them that you can use. They don't have, the knowledgeable individuals don't need to be native speakers. The idea is they should be more knowledgeable than you, so you derive something from them, you learn something from them because they're much more knowledgeable than you. Okay. Now, classes is very important. There are two important kinds of activities in CLT. But before this, let's take a break for 10 minutes. For 10 minutes. Take a break for 10 minutes. So it's 2:07. I'll see you at 2:17. Okay, thank you very much, class. Could you give a sign that you are here? Could you give a sign that you are here? Maybe type something in the chat box. Okay, thank you very much. So let's continue. There are two important kinds of activities in communicative language teaching. These are fluency activities and accuracy activities. Class in the past, CLT only involved fluency activities, but as time went on, the proponents realized they also need to have accuracy activities. You cannot totally get rid of behaviorism and audiolingualism. So the accuracy activities, they look like audiolingualism activities. So you need to have fluency and you need to have accuracy. You need to be fluent and you need to be accurate. If you're fluent but not accurate, that could lead to a breakdown in communication. If you're accurate but not fluent, that could also result in a breakdown in communication. So let's start out with activities. Let's start out with accuracy activities. Accuracy activities. Accuracy activities reflect classroom use of language. In classroom use of language, you focus on accuracy. Otherwise, your teacher might provide the wrong the you might not get the right feedback from your teacher or from your classmates. So accuracy activities reflect classroom use of language. They're related to explicit rules, following the explicit rules of language learning. So accuracy activities reflect classroom use of language, and they focus on the formation of correct examples of language because it's accuracy. So it should be the formation of correct examples of language. So you say, it's time I bought new shoes. You don't say, it's time I will buy new shoes. Or it's time I buy new shoes. You say, it's time I bought new shoes. Okay? So accuracy activities focus on the formation of correct examples of language. Again, this sounds like behaviorism and audiolingualism. Correct practice. And accuracy activities practice language out of context. Once again, this sounds like behaviorism and audiolingualism because it's out of context. So you say, I'm going to the clinic, I'm going to the library, I'm going to the city hall, I'm going to the canteen, I'm going to the classroom, all of which are out of context. But you practice it anyway for the sake of accuracy. And accuracy activities involve small samples of language. So in this example, one of them says, "You're not an English major," and the girl replies, "Yes, I am." So class, with if you disagree with a negative sentence, you have to say yes. Okay? If you disagree with a negative sentence, you have to say yes. That's in English. If you agree with a negative sentence, you have to say no. We'll discuss that when we go to structure of English next term, God willing. So, but they practice small samples of language. Like here, all you have to say is yes, yes I am, or no I'm not. Now, class, if this was face to face, we would have done this. we would have done this activity to show that accuracy activities involve uh, small samples of language. And accuracy activities do not require meaningful communication. You can utter anything as long as they are correct grammar, correct pronunciation, correct vocabulary. They don't need to be correct to have correct meaning. As long as you have correct pronunciation, correct grammar, correct vocabulary. They do not accuracy activities do not require meaningful communication. The focus is on being accurate. Okay, and accuracy activities control the choice of language. It limits the choice of language. So you fill out a form, or you fill out the form, you fill up a container, and you fill in gaps or blanks. You don't fill up blanks, you don't fill in the form, you fill out the form. So you control the choice of language in accuracy activities. The choice of language is controlled. Then we have fluency activities designed to make you fluent, to speak without stammering. They reflect natural use of language. Like, what are you doing tonight? Not much. And they focus on achieving communication. The example we have here, the Filipino says, I do to my hair what we say in Tagalog as pinapantay. And the American replies, you mean you even your hair. So the focus is on achieving communication. Okay, fluency activities reflect natural use of language, and the focus is on being able to communicate, achieving communication. And fluency activities require meaningful use of language. It's not pretend, it's not out of context, rather, the language you use is actually meaningful. So, like a child returning books, I'm returning these books I borrowed. And the librarian replies, I hope you learned a lot from them. So they're actually meaningful. And here, class, here's something you need to pay attention to here. They require the use of communication strategies. So here's an example. The guy asked, what did you do at the department store? And the Chinese girl said, I went eye shopping. Eye shopping? Just looking at the items without buying any of them. Oh, you mean window shopping? Ah, is that the right term? Yes. So, class, an example of communication strategy is coining your own word, creating your own word. So, in this case, the Chinese girl, didn't know the term for window shopping, so she invented her own meaning, her own term, meaning eye shopping. Okay, there are other foreigners, for example, who didn't know the word balloon. So they invented their own term, air ball. They use the term air ball for balloon. That's one strategy, okay, of trying to communicate. You create your own uh, term, like eye shopping. In the next part of the conversation, you have what is called negotiation of meaning or clarification. That's another strategy. And so fluency activities require the use of Communication strategies. Communication strategies are strategies that you use in order for you to be understood or for you to understand other people. Those are communication strategies, and they are used in fluency activities. Fluency activities also produce language that may not be predictable. So, for example, the mother and her daughter reads a book. What do you think will happen to the little boy? The mother said. And then, out of the blue, the child said, I think he will go to Alderaan and become a Jedi Knight. And you know what, class? When I was young, my mother would get surprised at all the things I would utter. Like sabi ng mami ko dati, oh, tingnan mo si Christino, ang galing-galing mag-English. Tapos sabi ko, hindi niya naman alam yung ibig sabihin ng word na destroy. Ngayon, taon-taon yung nanay ko doon. Out of the blue. Kung ano yung pinagsasabi ko. Okay? So, fluency activities produce language that may not be predictable. Mami, 5 ml lang ha? Okay, and fluency activities seek to link language use to context. Kailangan nasa context. So what is the term we use to describe a giraffe's skin? Reticulated. So it's in this context, okay? The children are able to use or make use of the term reticulated because it's in the context, because that's the term used to describe a giraffe's skin, reticulated. So, fluency activities seek to link language use to context. Another aspect of practice is the use of total physical response. This is another method of teaching but still used in communicative language teaching. We will discuss this later on. This is language learning involving a lot of physical actions because this mimics the way kids learn language. According to the proponent of total physical response, much of the language that children hear are commands. Do this, do that. Put the glass on the table. Put your clothes on the chair. Give me the scissors. Give me two candies. So those are the kinds of language forms that children hear, commands. And total physical response is subconscious. It doesn't teach rules. Okay? Now, here's another way to group communicative language teaching activities: mechanical, meaningful, and communicative. Mechanical activities are controlled practice activities which students can successfully carry out without necessarily understanding the language they are using. So this is like audiolingualism. You focus on the form and you don't understand the language. Maybe the focus is on pronunciation. So if it's pronunciation, it's all mechanical. Like when I say to you, repeat after me: knit, net, nat. So maybe there would be some of my students who would not understand the meaning of the word nat. It doesn't matter because your focus is on learning to pronounce correctly, particularly the vowels. So that those are examples of controlled practice activities which students can successfully carry out without necessarily understanding the language they are using. They're called mechanical. They're mechanical. A good example is pronunciation. Then we also have meaningful activities. Meaningful activities are controlled practice activities which students are able to express themselves meaningfully but with some control in the language used. So it's a little bit meaningful, but there's also a control. There's also some control in what language forms you would use. So an example is students are given a set of prepositions and a map. They are asked questions like, "Where is Julian's house?" So it's, for example, near Josephine's house, beside Josephine's house, in front of Josephine's house. So you have prepositions, you have a map, and students are asked questions and they respond using those prepositions. So the interaction is still meaningful, but the language is controlled. And then finally, there is what we call communicative. Communicative activities are activities where practice in using language within a real communicative context is the focus. So the idea is using language in a real communicative context where real information is exchanged and where the language use is not totally predictable because it's all about being able to communicate. So there's very little control over the language forms that are used. The focus is on real communication, the real communicative context. Real information is exchanged, and the language is not totally predictable. Okay, so we have the two kinds are fluency and accuracy, or we could also group the activities in CLT as mechanical, meaningful, and communicative. Okay, CLT involves a lot of task-based activities in which students have a specific objective to achieve using language. So communicative language teaching involves a lot of task-based activities. Those task-based activities have a specific objective, and you achieve that objective by using language. Okay, in conclusion, CLT as a method derived from communicative competence seeks to teach language by getting students to use language in communication, in actual communication. Okay, CLT came from communicative competence. It teaches students to learn language by actually using language in communication. Okay, are there any questions? Class, our midterm will be on Friday. It will be at 1 o'clock. Or maybe let's make it like 1:30. Let's make it 1:30. The coverage is all the way up to interactionist school of thought. So hanggang kay Selinker. Selinker's interlanguage. We will not include CLT, we will not include audiolingualism. Now, if the president declares that classes should be face to face, then we will have to do it face to face. Otherwise, we will do it online. It's 40 items. It's actually 43 items, but it's only up to 40. So you have a bonus of 3 items. Or if there's an item that's a failure, then we have other replacement items. And you have 35 minutes to answer it. If it's face to face, your treasurer will come with me to photocopy the test papers. If it's face to face, your treasurer will come with me, will see me, and she will photocopy the test papers. If it's online, you will do it in LMS. Any other questions, class? By the way, class, that includes it includes writing clearly and elegantly. It also includes plagiarism and proper citing. Let me show those videos. Show those videos. Okay, you have. So I'll show a tab. I'm not sure if I can show a tab. Wala. Nagiging blanco siya kapag yung sinishare ko yung tab. In any case, class, it will involve plagiarism versus proper citing, uh, improving your writing, shifting to a formal style. Hindi na pala. Hindi. Sorry, sorry. Ah, so plagiarism versus proper citing, at saka writing clearly and elegantly, at saka shifting to a formal style. Bakit may ganun? Okay, hindi na natin isasama yung listening to lectures. Okay? Magbibigay na i-send ko na lang sa GC para mas malinaw. So, kasali ang plagiarism versus proper citing, kasali ang writing clearly and elegantly, kasali ang shifting to a formal style in writing, kasama ang the Cornell method. Yon, hanggang dun lang sa preliminaries, and then yung mga lesson proper na. Na proper ano na. Okay? Okay, question. Yes, Riven, meron dun sa LMS, may part doon nakasulat topic 1 preliminaries. Kasama 'yon sa midterm. Okay, kasama sa midterm yung preliminaries. Okay. So okay na ba kayo sa 40 items or gusto niyo dagdagan? I'm sure hindi niyo gustong dagdagan. Okay, 40 items lang yung midterm. So I'm sure okay na. Okay, do you have any other question? Yes, multiple choice lahat. Multiple choice lahat. Remember class, multiple choice is simple to answer but not necessarily easy to answer. Okay. Thank you very much, class. If you have no more questions, stay safe, take care, God bless, enjoy the rest of the day. Bye bye.